I'm home.
Throws to the near side, and that's intercepted. Intercepted by Jack Jones, heading down the near sideline, and this will be a pick six for Jack Jones and a touchdown for Arizona State.
People here, when you think of Sun Devil football, you think of Sun Devil for life.
Here we go, 7 seconds. Berkovici. He's just going to air it out deep downfield, and no white shirts around. Oh, Jalen Strong! Caught for a touchdown! Jalen Strong makes the catch!
I went to Arizona State. Right. I'm a Sun Devil, man.
This is about the Valley. We need the Valley. If we get the Valley all in, the sky is the limit.
Welcome to Speak of the Devils, the premier podcast for Sun Devil football. I'm Brad Denny with 3TV.
I'm Joe Healy with DevilsDigest.com.
All right, Joe, as we are recording this, we are just about a week away until Dillingham's Devils take the field for the first time officially as spring practice is opening up. Now, it's always obviously a very interesting time with some new players and some new coaches and a lot of new faces. This year, it's ramped up to an 11.
Yeah, the who's who list is a lot of new names. It's almost more like who is returning, who do we know who is here. It's like a new school year, like when you're a kid and you're trying to figure out the people in your classes, and you might know a couple folks, but everybody else, you don't know who the heck they are. So a lot is going to be figured out, hopefully, over these next handful of weeks, the next month or so of calendar time from spring practices, from the start of that through the spring game. A lot to determine, a lot to put together, position battles, personnel, everything that you could think of. Obviously, doing so with the new coaching staff has its inherent challenges as well. So it's an exciting time. It'll be cool to see some action on the field with this Dillingham era coming together, but there certainly will be many questions to be answered, positions to be figured out, and by the way, trying to put this program back on stable ground after what statistically has to be regarded as one of, if not the worst seasons ASU's had in its football history. I know a lot of folks aren't really fixating on that part, nor should they be, because there's a lot of positivity, but there's a big to-do list coming up with these next few weeks.
Just a few things going on that ASU will be starting to attack once they hit the practice field. Tuesday morning, March 14th, the first of 15 sessions that will culminate in Saturday, April 15th, spring game, starting, I believe, at noon, as we can officially now say, very wisely tying that into Pat's run. Obviously, a lot going on, and we could not even begin to attack such a monumental task, so many new faces, so many position battles, without bringing in the heavy artillery. The one, the only, the man making his 88th, extending his own uncatchable record on the show, publisher of DevilsDigest.com, the one, the only, Hod Rabino. Hod, thanks for coming in. How are you tonight?
Brad, Joe, always a pleasure. Like Joe said, very, very intriguing spring practice. There's a lot to talk about. Not only just a lot of new faces, but just new schemes on both sides of the ball. Definitely exciting time for Sun Devil fans, and there's going to be a lot to talk about in this podcast. That's for sure.
Yeah, we will be definitely chopping it all down. We're going to go position by position, talking about the key players, some of the guys who need a big camp, some opportunities, some position battles. Obviously, kind of first and foremost, who's going to be QB1? That answer is going to start. We might not get it in spring, but the first info that we're going to be getting will be starting this spring. We should say before we jump in here, you wouldn't. As originally scheduled, I've heard another voice on this podcast. We got to give him a little grief because he's was not able to attend tonight because he's out in Disneyland having fun. I saw his tweet about eating a bunch of churros. Cole Topham, Ham Analysis, of course. He would have been making this would have been his 8th appearance, tying him with Herm Edwards for 9th most in show history. So his Herm tying appearance will have to come at a later date. So hope you're having fun, Cole. we'll hold it down without you. But before we dive into all that, some other non-football news that is of note before we get started. ASU basketball, obviously coming off the McHale Mary, the Miracle at McHale, the shot around the state, whatever you want to call it, had an opportunity, Hod, to really kind of make a statement going up against LA schools, maybe perhaps get a first-round bye in the Pac-12 tournament. Didn't happen that way. Obviously, UCLA is one of the nation's premier programs, and they took care of ASU. But I feel like ASU let one get away against USC. Now the Devils are going to be the 6th seed in the Pac-12 tournament, playing on Wednesday evening, I believe, pretty late. It's like a 9:30 tip or something, Arizona time, against Oregon State. What's your reaction? Because obviously that win over U of A, great, but ASU is also just kind of a 60-foot buzzer beater prayer away from having lost those final 3 games. What are your impression of what you saw against the LA schools, and where do you think that puts ASU in terms of their tournament hopes?
Look, it was absolutely known fact that they did have murderer's row of a schedule to end the regular season at Arizona, at UCLA, and at USC. A lot of folks were even skeptical if they could win one game, and sure, it took a miracle shot to win that game, but that really naturally raised the bar of expectations for ASU to at least try to come away with a split on the road trip to LA. And, the UCLA game, I think things got out of control fairly early in the game, even though ASU definitely started on the strong note. With USC, it was just really frustrating because you played a team which maybe is better than ASU, but I don't think is country mile better than the Sun Devils. And this is a game that ASU really needed just to beef up their tournament resume, because USC is pretty much a lock to be in the field of 68. So the fact that you got swept, you're not going to have the first round bye because you finished not only 5th but 6th in the Pac-12 because of all the tie-breakery that goes on, and your tournament resume right now is really, really shaky. You're playing against Oregon State in the first game of the Pac-12 tournament. That's not a win that's really going to move the needle as much as you want for the resume. And if you beat Oregon State, you get to meet USC. Now, some people say, well, it's really hard to beat a team 3 times in the same season. Maybe that gives ASU a glimmer of hope against USC. But on the other hand, they already did beat Oregon State twice this year. So if you're applying the same logic, maybe you're not all that confident against Oregon State on that Wednesday game. Insult to injury, tip-off 9:30 Arizona time. The clock has not moved quite yet. It's going to move on Sunday. But nonetheless, it's really anybody's guess how well or how poorly Arizona State is going to perform in Las Vegas in the Pac-12 tournament. I know the knee-jerk reaction is don't really expect a whole lot. Don't even be shocked by a loss to Oregon State. But if the Sun Devils some way, somehow can dig deep and really play like they did in November and in December, the early part of the Pac-12 schedule where they won 4 games in a row, maybe this team doesn't have to win the Pac-12 tournament to go in, which obviously is going to be an automatic bid at that point. But if they can win some way, somehow 3 games in the Pac-12, if you're talking about scenarios where they're probably not going to sweat out Selection Sunday, that's the only scenario that I see in mind. If they are going to beat Oregon State and are going to beat USC, I think they could be in. But guess what? It's going to be Dayton bound once more. I know a lot of fans don't even think it's a real NCAA game anyway. I've been to Dayton, and it is. There's NCAA tournament banners all around, but I know for some fans to be the last 4 in and playing in Dayton really doesn't count much more than a play-in game. So we'll see. It's really hard for me to speculate how well or how poorly Arizona State's going to do in Las Vegas. I'd like to think that they're playing right now with a huge chip on their shoulder, trying to squeeze into the field of 68. We'll see what happens.
All right, so obviously they got some work to do. So we'll see what the Devils can do in Vegas, if they can make a little run and perhaps continue this season a little bit beyond this upcoming Pac-12 tournament. All right, so another news item that has got a lot of folks talking is just it seems like there's another renewed effort by the Big 12 to maybe do some poaching. The four corner schools, Utah, Colorado, and of course ASU and Arizona. Now this, of course, is coming at a time where there's a lot of stuff out there of perhaps some stuff of dubious credibility, other stuff that perhaps is a little bit more in line. So, because obviously the Pac-12's future is very much in limbo. The media deal is in progress. We don't know what we've seen. The Ion Television, Apple TV, what linear TV elements are going to be part of that. Maybe start with you, Joe, because you're a Texas guy at heart, and that's kind of the heart of Big 12 country. What are your thoughts on just the Pac-12's future, ASU's place? Is the Pac-12 on borrowed time? If they have an opportunity to make a jump to a conference like the Big 12, which of course did just secure their most recent media rights deal, what do you feel is in the best interest of Sun Devil athletics?
Everybody that's in the Pac-12 right now should get the hell out as quickly as humanly possible. It should feel like it's that there's a literal fire going on, and you got to find higher ground no matter what. It's a tough, position for the current administration of the conference to be in, but they're just so drastically far behind the eight ball by what the previous administration did that to try to pull it together and create something, that's the old making chicken salad deal. Just think of it on a real simple level. If you have the two universities that are exiting the conference, if you do nothing, that's not good. You're not going to steal programs or universities that are like committed to other major conferences, and so you're kind of getting these scraps as the best potential options. We're talking about the San Diego States, the SMUs, the Fresno States, the Boise States, that sort of thing. Yeah, they have value in certain ways, but is anything, or the combination, is it going to do anything to compensate for the loss of a UCLA or a USC? Of course not. So the Big 12 for me seems like a great opportunity, and it's not too big of a hike. When there was a lot of talk of this very topic months ago, whenever that was, it was that short bit of time where it seemed like this announcement was going to be made, right? People are even talking about like the SEC or the ACC. The SEC, it's the biggest conference on earth when it comes to prominence in college football right now. But you go in there and ASU goes from a 500 team to a worse than that team in all likelihood. So I think the Big 12 is an opportunity, if that comes around, that you can just get some much greater stability, much greater exposure. You're not too terribly far outside of your typical region, especially if you see like these pod scenarios that folks are throwing out there. And you're still in a spot where, again, you're not like going downward to the Mountain West to be like you were in the 1970s, but you're not putting yourself at a competitive disadvantage. So if that were on the table, I would take it 10 minutes ago.
It's going to be interesting because, that would be an interesting fit when you have conference rivals in Cincinnati and Morgantown and Orlando. But it's interesting because, there does seem to be some optimism from people that have historically at least been plugged into the Pac-12, the Wilners and Canzanos of the world, that perhaps there's some hybrid nature of streaming, linear TV, ESPN. Obviously, you got to say in the good graces of ESPN in some form or fashion. They basically run the sport anyway. I put a Twitter poll out there, just kind of with under the premise of assuming the media dollars are roughly equal from a competitive standpoint. Which conference do you want to see ASU in the future? And the options, of course, were the Big 12 or the Pac-12. 57% of the 995 votes said Big 12. So I think kind of that same thing you talked about, Joe. Just people are kind of just sick of the drama, the instability. Hod, do you think that this matters, right? Like, and perhaps in a 5-10 year grand scheme of that, the sport seems like it's moving towards a Power 2 group of 8, and ASU's not getting in that Power 2, conceivably, anytime soon, if at all.
Yeah, no, I'm with Joe. I think that ASU really should make the move to the Big 12. I tweeted out a few days ago that I feel that ASU and other schools in the Pac-12 have been plenty patient with the Pac-12 leadership. George Kilikov is head and shoulders better than Larry Scott, and I know the bar is really set very low when you talk to Larry Scott, but I think he just walked into a really crappy situation where, not even 12 months into his tenure, the LA schools bolt. Yeah. And the LA schools did not even give him or anybody at the Pac-12 leadership any inclining, any vague clue that they were going to leave. So he was really put in a very tough spot. Now, his background is media rights deals, so there was some optimism that even after the LA schools left, and definitely before they left, that the Pac-12 could get a good media rights deal that really would eclipse the old one that they have with Fox and ESPN. No matter who the partner is going to be. But as time goes by, it just seems less and less likely. And I think there's some kind of internal struggle with the Pac-12 leadership. Do they try to secure the media deal before they add two schools like SMU or San Diego State, or they really do it in the reverse? But I really think that Arizona State has to be much quicker thinking on their feet, if that makes sense. We know that U of A, and maybe more from a basketball than a football standpoint, is dying to go to the Big 12. And I know that ASU and U of A would like to go together to another conference if both of them decided to leave the Pac-12. Colorado is kind of weird because, as we all know, they used to be in the Big 12. Is it kind of like, back to the future for them? I mean, are they excited? Are they really, maybe combative about it? That's really interesting. I don't think that Utah and Colorado are "quote unquote" married like both Arizona schools, but I think that Utah would probably feel that peer pressure that if both Arizona schools and Colorado decided to go to the Big 12, they really would follow suit. So I'm with Joe. I don't have much faith that the Pac-12 is going to be able to land a good media deal, let alone one that's better than what they had last time around, let alone better than one that's going to be on par with the Big 12. I'm not even talking about the SEC. That's just really crazy money. I understand the geographical challenges. Big 12 really would almost a coast to coast conference. Probably the only one in college sports altogether. But maybe you can work out some kind of pod alignment, so you're not really traveling to Orlando / Cincinnati / Morgantown, West Virginia on a pretty frequent basis. Don't forget, I know we talk a lot about football and basketball, but it's really the Olympic sports that can suffer quite a bit. You're talking about sports that don't have a big budget to begin with. They pretty much are just siphoning money away from football. And now we talk about a travel budget that's really going to be exponentially higher just because of those East Coast trips or Midwest trips. How much value is it really going to be? So I'm not saying there should not be any cost-benefit analysis done on ASU's part or any other school in the Pac-12 before they make a move, but it's just hard for me to see that even if they took a week, a month, so just agonize over all the financial numbers that are included and saw what is a better outcome, to go to the Big 12 or to stay with the Pac-12 with the addition of, let's say, SMU and SDSU. It's hard for me to see that ASU really comes to a conclusion that they're better off staying put. What really kind of frustrates me, and I'm sure a lot of ASU fans feel the same way too, we're talking about a sport alignment or sport affiliation, but for some reason it looks like a lot of schools, and Arizona State I think is guilty, as many other schools in the Pac-12, talking about academic reputation. Oh, do we want to be in the same school academic reputation as West Virginia or University of Central Florida? I'm just throwing out
research classification.
Yeah, research classification. It's like, guys, come on. This is about sports. This is not about academics. Let's really put this in perspective. Sure, it was cool to be in the same conference as Cal and Stanford, some of the leading academic institutions, but there's no Pac-12 academic conference games going on or anything like that. Same with any other major conference in the country. So I just really wish that the university presidents, including Michael Crow, the ASU president, would really stop thinking about this realignment from an academic perspective and think about a pure sports perspective. There's not going to be any debate league games between different universities. They're going to play football. They're going to play basketball. They're going to play 10,000 different Olympic sports. That's where the focus. That's really needs to be. Just really forget about the academic angle. I mean, you're not going into conference with a bunch of community colleges and trade schools. No disrespect to those institutions. So let's really keep it in perspective. It's about sports. It's not about academics. You really need to do what's best for your athletic department. And again, I really think a move to the Big 12 sooner rather than later would be the best thing for Arizona State.
All right, so a lot of questions surrounding the future viability of this conference, and there's some speculation that it doesn't matter what this next media deal is, because it's going to be the last media deal in the history and the lifespan, perhaps, of the Pac-12 10-8 conference. In any event, we do know that this season ASU will be in the Pac-12, and they've got a lot of new faces on this roster, over 40 new scholarship players that are to be joining this program. So now we're going to kind of dive into what to expect from spring, the position battles, the key names and such. And, obviously, it all starts at quarterback. Now, obviously, we got a race to be who's going to be QB1. And you're not just having a new quarterback. You have, obviously, a new head coach, a young, savvy, offensive-minded head coach. Will Waldron coming in as the offensive coordinator as well. Now, there's a few guys, obviously, that are coming back. Most notably, Trenton Bourguet. This, unfortunately for him, it's going to be like the second spring where he's going to have, a foot issue. This one, though, he did have surgery after the season ended, and just, hope indications are that he's working his way back. He should feel pretty good. The last I heard that, there's hopes that should be at or near 100%. But this is going to be a really, really interesting competition, because obviously they're adding Drew Pine, who started most of the last season for Notre Dame. Led the Fighting Irish to some wins. I know we've talked at length on this program about perhaps his addition, perhaps maybe not being a huge needle mover. Jacob Conover, who threw for 1 billion yards when he was playing for Sean Aguano at Chandler. Bennett Meredith and Dalen McLemore, guys that have been in the program. And then, this a true freshman who comes in with just a little bit of hype, a little bit of notoriety, and Jaden Rashada. Starting off, guys, like, how do you see, just in a broad sense, before perhaps we get down to some of the guys in particular, just overall, how do you think this new staff is going to conduct this competition?
So it's a tough look, because you don't necessarily have, obviously, outside of Sean Aguano, who's not involved in this particular position race, you don't necessarily have that allegiance that you might have when you have a holdover staff and players and guys that they've kind of committed themselves to. So in some cases it can be a blank slate. I'm curious, and it seems like you're asking the same question, but like, was Pine brought in here to be the starter or to compete to be the starter? If that makes sense. Did the coaching staff isolate him, identify him as a transfer candidate, and bring him in here because they felt that he was an upgrade over Trenton Bourguet, and I'm not saying a gimme, but kind of the express lane of sorts might be given to him to get the shot? We will see. It always has been at least intriguing and evoking questions when he committed ASU, because you figure, okay, you're bringing back your starting quarterback. If you bring in a guy who was a starting quarterback for a very prominent team, it seems like some basic math. So we'll see if all things are equal health-wise, how that shakes out, with the reps. And then, Rashada, his presence here in the spring, be eager to see what that is like. This is a very different deal, obviously, in many ways, than like when Jaden Daniels came in as a true freshman, because of the lack of depth at quarterback at that time. So, it's a pretty unique situation for ASU to have a highly regarded quarterback recruit. I don't think people should compare it to that in terms of what can be expected right out of the gates. So if you do some basic math, it kind of makes you think that it's a Pine Bourguet thing, perhaps, to think just from a logical perspective. But I'm really eager to see how that part shakes out. I just really kind of get the impression that there's going to be a lot of pressure on Trenton Bourguet to perform to be able to retain the job that he had.
Yeah, so hold on. How do you see this happen? Because obviously, the commitment and signing of Rashada, one of the nation's elite quarterback recruits, got the fans all riled up. And for right man, obviously he's a very, very talented quarterback in his own right, a son of a legacy, but he has come in as a true freshman. And Bourguet did have some good moments last year when he finally got his chance. Banged up a little bit. His size was always going to be a concern. Pine, led Notre Dame to some big wins, but also has some kind of concerns of his own. Conover has some experience as a the FBS quarterback, but really hasn't been on the field during actual games. How do you see this staff kind of running this competition? Like, who do you expect to see perhaps opening up as taking that first snap of spring, or how do you see perhaps how they just the conducting this in terms of you have a bunch of guys but only one ball.
Yeah, well, I do agree with Joe that I think it is going to come down to Bourguet and Pine. It's really hard for me to see a third or fourth name on the quarterback list that's going to end up being the starter at during the season opener. I do agree with you, Brad, that on two main topics. First, no, we're not going to know who the starting quarterback is at the end of spring practice. That's going to be determined sometime in August. Now it's just a matter of, are we talking about the second week or third week of August until we get that designation from the coaching staff. But the more important thing you said, Brad, is that the health of Trent Bourguet, I think, determines a lot here. And the fact that Trent Bourguet is not 100% locked to be practicing in spring practice with absolutely zero limitations, there's no guarantee there's going to be out there in every team segment, I think really does shuffle the deck, if you will, when it comes to the pecking order. I would expect Drew Pine to be the starting quarterback in the first team segment we'll see in the beginning of spring practice on Tuesday the 14th. But again, that's assuming that Trent Bourguet cannot be 100% practicing without limitations. If Trent Bourguet is healthy, Kenny Dillingham already announced that he will be the starting quarterback in spring practice. So that's really what we have over there in terms of the dynamic between both those two quarterbacks. Now the bigger question is, okay, let's say Bourguet cannot even have one team segment due to his health. Again, there's nothing to do with his performance, okay? How much can Jacob Conover and/or Jaden Rashada establish themselves as the number 2 quarterback ending spring practice, and how much can that momentum carry to August when you do expect Bourguet to be 100% healthy? I mean, is Bourguet, just by virtue of not taking any team segments, really going to be behind the 8 ball in the quarterback competition? That's going to be a big question to me.
Yeah, so many questions and angles here, and obviously we've covered various other quarterback competitions. And you look back to 2012, and then 2016, and then I guess kind of quasi 2017 with the addition of Blake Barnett back then. But this is interesting because you have no established starters, but you have some guys with considerable starting experience, or at least having a good season on the belt, and then the blue chip quarterback recruit that everybody's so excited to see. You have Kenny Dillingham's reputation as something of a quarterback whisperer and what he was able to do with Bo Nix. But I know while Bourguet and Pine, those are going to be the guys that kind of, given their experience, probably going to get the good first looks. But just what should fans expect to see? Because obviously a blue chip signing is always going to generate a lot of discussion. Obviously, there's a lot of posts in the Huddle and Devil's Digest about Jaden Rashada and what he's bringing to this program. What are reasonable expectations for Jaden Rashada over these next 5 weeks?
I think it really depends on the distribution of reps, and that's really basically an unknown. We don't know what Kenny Dillingham and or Bo Baldwin are really have in mind in terms of quarterback reps. And by the way, maybe even a bigger question is, how much is this really going to fall on Bo Baldwin, the offensive coordinator's shoulders, rather than be maybe a joint decision between him and Kenny Dillingham? Because Kenny Dillingham stated, and I think it was definitely the right approach, that he's not going to be calling plays on Saturdays. Now, that doesn't mean that he has zero involvement in the offense, and especially the quarterback position during spring practice, even during preseason camp in August. But the question is, is there really going to be some kind of mutual decision between Dillingham and Baldwin, or is this going to be really just more on Baldwin to decide what is going to be the reps distribution? And in terms of just implementing the offensive system, if you're going to choose to implement it, in a very methodical way, using some steps ahead of the others, will that approach really benefit somebody like a Drew Pine, who's maybe less of a dual threat quarterback compared to Jaden Rashada? So those are just a lot of questions that really remain unanswered. I think from a leadership standpoint, and I know that both coaches are very big on their quarterback being a bona fide leader, not even somebody who's marginal, somebody who needs to defer to other players for that leadership spot. I mean, sure, guys like Bourguet, guys like Pine are definitely going to have the advantage over a guy like Rashada, who's just a true freshman, or even over a guy like Jacob Conover, who had very, very limited game experience at BYU. I mean, people say that Jaden Rashada is unknown just because he's making the transition from high school to college. Well, Conover has been in college for a couple of years, and we don't know a whole lot with him. I don't have the stats in front of me, but they're very, very paltry. I mean, really close to nothing in terms of playing time up there in Provo. So there's just a lot of uncertainty right now. But again, I don't mean to oversimplify it. I really think it's going to be Bourguet or Pine that's going to be the starter at the season opener. I just can't believe that any other quarterback on the roster, Rashada, Conover, let alone the guys like McLemore and Meredith, that are really going to be a true threat to be that starter when they do line up against Southern Utah.
Yeah, and I'm just racking my brain as you're talking, like when the last time was. I mean, I could think of some names. But how rare it is for a true freshman quarterback at ASU to play beyond the point of redshirting, if not being the starter. And obviously, the only true starter in that realm was Jaden Daniels. But you think about Mike Bercovici, you think of Danny Sullivan, and I mean that's taking us back 15 plus years. It's just kind of rare. So folks are thinking that maybe there will be special packages for Rashada to be used, that sort of thing. Again, it certainly can be done. It's just when we take it into the context of what has happened historically here under some coaches who've been gone for more than a decade, it's just a very unique thing to be in the circumstance of having this high profile quarterback, trying to fit him into action, see where he can fit into action, but it not being a circumstance like when Jaden Daniels arrived and there were, no true high caliber starting candidates outside of him. So it's a unique circumstance to try to visualize what sort of role will be had this season by pretty much the entirety of the quarterback depth.
Yeah, I think fans should perhaps temper some immediate expectations on Rashada. I mean, certainly a wealth of talent, but it is making a considerable jump up. He's got some veterans who has starting experience ahead of him. And like one of the things that you mentioned, Hod, the leadership aspect. How many times have we heard coaches over the years say, the coaches don't necessarily name the starting quarterback. The team kind of tells and informs them as to who they want to be their leader. Today, ASU put out a release that mentioned a leadership council of 10 players, and some of the names that you expect, the Michael Matusas, the Jordan Clarks of the world, and a name that's on there, Trenton Bourguet, is as a team leader. Obviously, this is something that the team really kind of rallied around him. But with the coaching change last year, this is a guy who's not afraid of competition.
Yeah, definitely not afraid of competition. But there's always that dynamic of how much of a leader can you be if you're not a starter. I'm not saying it's impossible, no matter what sport it is, whether it's college, whether it's a professional level. But I would think it's much easier to be a starter, let alone QB1, and really be an effective leader. So again, I mean, not to belabor the point about Trent Bourguet's health, but that to me can determine a lot, not only in the spring, but probably bleeding over to August. Because again, if Jacob Conover and Jaden Rashada, if one of them can really establish themselves as the number 2 quarterback in the spring, I mean, what happens in that first practice in August? I mean, does Bourguet just get grandfathered as being the backup quarterback, assuming Drew Pine is a starter, and whatever Conover and or Rashada did in the spring is just really null and void because Bourguet is that veteran leader, is that proven player compared to guys like Conover and Rashada? It's just a really interesting dynamic over there. So if we don't see Bourguet do any team segments at all, I'm telling you, this quarterback competition could be a whole lot more interesting in August than people would give it credit. And maybe Drew Pine, just being the healthy, available, and obviously has to be effective quarterback in spring practice and in August, maybe he's the one that does win the starting job. And again, I'm not saying Bourguet has no chance whatsoever to win the starting job. That's not what I'm implying at all. But ultimately, he has to be healthy enough to really take all those team segments to show in practice day in and day out that he has mastered the new offensive scheme that the Arizona State is trying to run. And again, to your point, Brad, I mean, if he's going to be the leader of the team, or at least one of the primary leaders on the team, he has to be QB1 on the practice field each and every day. And if his foot health situation is not going to be solved in a manner that allows him to do that, it's going to be, like I said, a much, much interesting position battle that a lot of people would give it credit to.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of things that we'll have perhaps a better feel for after that first week, after those first 3 practices, the Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, to see just what Bourguet can do. There's been a lot of stuff on social media that he's out there throwing and stuff, and I know that we both talked to folks in his camp that they feel pretty good and optimistic about the progress, but ultimately we have to see what he can do when you're out there competing. So we'll see exactly what happens, but obviously a lot of guys that are going to be vying for that job, and obviously this is an offensive system that has proven that can be pretty explosive if it has the right trigger man. And whether it's going to be Bourguet, Pine, Conover, Rashada, I guess shouldn't necessarily count out Bennett Meredith or something along those lines. But yeah, obviously if you feel right now with the 2 guys with the most FBS experience, probably leading this race early on, we will see. In any event, though, this is going to be an offense that's going to also like to run the ball. And Sean Aguano, the one holdover on this coaching staff, he's got a pretty good track record, guys. I mean, obviously, in every year that he's been in Tempe, outside of the COVID year, of course, he's produced a 1,000-yard rusher. And so right now, this is going to be a big question mark because, of course, Valade is off to the NFL with his 1,000 yards and 18 touchdowns. But there's got some opportunities for ASU to find a good ground game. And obviously, if you have a good ground game, that helps your quarterback kind of settle into that starting role. Obviously, this is talking about the guy who perhaps has got fans a little excited about what he was able to do in very limited duty, most notably against Arizona, Tevin White, coming in as a 4-star prospect last year. But now, is he going to be able to be the guy? Is he going to be ready to carry the load? I mean, physically, he kind of looks apart. He's about over 6 foot, 6'1", 210 pounds. Him and George Hart are kind of the more notable returning backs. Do you think that White, and perhaps given with his familiarity with Sean Aguano, returning as the running backs coach, perhaps positions him to maybe take that first snap?
I mean, it'll be interesting to see because, naturally what we have had seen in the entirety of the Herm Edwards era, or at least the vast majority of it, and the only exception you can really say is the COVID season. And, Sean Aguano generally followed suit through the duration of his portion as head coach last year, is just one bell cow running back, no sort of platoon deal. Even when you really had, Chip Trainum and Rashad White in 2021, wasn't really a proportionate distribution, whether it was Benjamin, whether it was Rashad White, Valade. You had your running back number 1 taking the bulk of the carries. And so I'm interested to see if White is up to snuff in that regard, or if they have the mentality of going a different direction or just a different approach in general, because, I'm sure you'll bring him up, but a guy like Scatabo coming out, I mean, that's going to be one of the most intriguing players, to watch as he develops in his early stages of his Sun Devil career, because he was a highly accomplished player at a lower division of play. So is his addition to the roster something that is, starter to starter? Is it a lateral shift, or is he going from a starter and an All-America caliber performer in the FCS to a guy who's more of a bench contributor at this level?
Yeah, I'm really excited about what Scatabo can do because, he was able to do at the FCS level. He runs violently. I mean, he's kind of got some DeMario Richard to him, and so there might be a situation if you look at kind of what we know in the most recent data points of what the Oregon Ducks were able to do last year with Kenny Dillingham as their OC. You had Bucky Irving carrying the ball over 156 times over 13 games, and then Whittington 139 carries. So much greater equitable share there, as opposed to the last couple seasons where I know we've been talking about it, and fans were like, well, hey, get Daniel Ngata as your second running back, a little bit more involved. That never really happened because there was just the dynamic, whether it's Rashad White or Valade, guy that just kind of was able to do it all. But the Ducks under Dillingham like to use two two backs. And, Scadaboo is a guy, 5'10", 222 pounds, guy who can catch the ball, be very dynamic. Now, granted, step up from Sac State, but, now he was able to do something really good. ASU's had really good luck with running back transfers. Of course, we shouldn't discount DeCarlos Brooks, a familiar name to Pac-12 fans, a local player at the prep level, played a few years at Cal. But to me, it seems like White and Scadaboo are going to be the two guys that perhaps are going to be jumping out early on in this backfield.
Yeah, I would agree, Brad. I think that you definitely have some intrigue over here at the running back position because, like you said, we're finally going to see that 1 and 1A running back. We thought we were going to have it with Rashad White at Chip Trayanum. We thought we were going to have it with Valade and Daniel Ngata. And like you said, that really never came to fruition just because a guy like Rashad White and then a year later Valade were such dominant running backs. Obviously, put up great numbers. Rashad White coming off a solid rookie season with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm really curious to see where Valade plays on Sundays because he's definitely a good can be a good NFL running back. But as much intrigue as I see in this, Brad, I see this also as an area of concern. I mean, really, out of all the positions, on offense, this is the one that, to me, does have some question marks. And this is a position where I would not be shocked at the end of spring practice, the coaching staff gets together and says, we need to hit the portal and get another good running back to really elevate the competition, just elevate the talent level in the running back room. I do agree with you that Tevin White, even in somewhat limited action against U of A, did really show a lot. And I know U of A, and I'm not trying to, start a whole territorial competition argument over here on the podcast, but that was definitely one of the worst defenses in the Pac-12. The numbers bear them out. But I don't think it should take away from anything that Tevin White did do in that game, kind of a glimpse into the future when it comes to the running back position at Arizona State. Cameron Scadaboo, is just going to be that everlasting question, does a star at the FCS level can also be a star or at least a solid player at the Power 5 level? So I'm very curious to see how those two players, again, I think in a true, and the emphasis true, 1 and 1A roles, how effective they can be. But again, I wouldn't be shocked, and this is not a knock on the position group at all, if at the end of spring practice the coaches say, hey, you know what, we need one more running back from the portal. So we can make projections now, and at the end of spring practice on April 15th, make some kind of conclusions concerning the running back group. But then if ASU is lucky, they can get an absolute stud from the portal when it does open from May 1st through May 15th. And in August, you could be talking about a whole different dynamic in terms of the pecking order and running backs trying to find a niche just because they added somebody from the portal. So I think it's imperative that this running back group really puts a lot of question marks, a lot of ambiguities to rest. And I don't know, maybe I'm alone in how I feel about this running back group, but I'm not going to call it an area of concern. That might be premature. But again, if you look at all the positions on offense, this one really has the most question marks that have to be answered because there's just not a lot of proven experience over here in the running back room.
Yeah, I think at this particular point, it would be a surprise, obviously a pleasant surprise, if ASU was not in a position after spring ball to where we're saying they really need to go get a starting running back from the transfer portal. It's not saying that these players are not starting caliber running backs. We've really been spoiled in the last several years with, the NFL caliber players like Eno Benjamin setting school records, Rashad White putting up incredible numbers in the year and a quarter that he played here. And obviously Valade in the 1 year that he played here. So it's just hard to look at Tevin White and say, okay, that guy's ready to go run for 1,000 yards. You're not sure, this is just resume alone about, an FCS player as accomplished as he is coming up and being able to duplicate or maybe do, like 80, 90% of what he did statistically at this level. By the things that I hear, that Scadaboo is a very hard runner, maybe not, the speediest, quickest runner in the world. There's certainly a place for that. Is that your top running back? That remains to be seen. And then someone like, DeCarlos Brooks, yes, it's wonderful to, come back home and join this program. But if you look at the body of work at Cal, that's just simply something that, if you're objective and look at what's been done on paper, doesn't make you think that that's going to stand out and repeat the performance at running back that's been happening over the last several years. So, again, if someone were to stand out and Tevin White gets his shot and he's the guy and it says, wow, no, this guy has what it takes. Like, yeah, he was a 4-star recruit, so it's coming together. Cool. Or if a Scadaboo's like, no, he's leaping right into this level and he's showing what it takes and he's just busting heads out there. That guy can carry the ball 20, 25 times a game and really get it done, then great. I'm just curious if that will be the case because, again, the transfer portal gives you a lot of options. You don't necessarily have to stay put with what you have personnel-wise throughout the entirety of the offseason to where it's like, okay, this is just what it's going to be and we got to make good with it. So I'd be really intrigued what transpires with this because, I agree with you, Hod, as well that, I think that this offense and Dillingham can, for the lack of a better word, sell a very good situation to a very good running back, maybe someone in the grad transfer mold of an ex-Valade, somebody that goes through spring ball and maybe is poised to graduate and is in the grad transfer position and needs a new home for a year. That could be an interesting circumstance. So, like I said, I would be quite surprised if by the time we're talking about this team for the fall camp that there isn't a marquee addition at running back, and that will be by way of what happens over these next handful of weeks.
Yeah, I think you got to make a move because I am personally optimistic about what the combination of White and Scadaboo can do. But just from at least a quality scholarship depth perspective, I think you need another guy that has some FBS ability. If you can get a guy that can perhaps is in that mold, perhaps a guy at a group of 5 or something that you can make that jump up, and during that May 1st to 15th window, you make that move. Talent acquisition is the game in college football. But I do think that White and Scadaboo, I'm optimistic. I'm very excited to see what they can do. But I just think from a numbers perspective, the physicality and the position, you're one ankle injury away from being hard pressed, and all of a sudden, if you're not able to get a consistent running game going, then it just has that domino effect. So we will see how things transpire, how big of a mark these guys can make over the 15 sessions, and correspondingly, what the coaches see from spring from the backfield and what that makes them do later on in the early May. Now, moving over to wide receiver. Now, this is an interesting position group to me. There's some notable names that are returning, but there's a whole lot of new names. Not a whole lot of necessarily proven production, but a lot of intrigue here. Now, and I think what's really interesting is just you obviously know who your wide receiver one is in Elijah Badger, coming off that breakout 2022 campaign. I think the big question here is what's his ceiling? How good can he be, and especially now in perhaps an offense that is more conducive to putting him on display. But the question is, one of my big questions, Hod, is like, how's the quarterback battle going to kind of impact the rapport of the receivers? Because you don't have that known quarterback, that one guy. There's going to be some rotation at quarterback. Now, how's that going to work as you're trying to work out your wide receiver depth chart with 6 scholarship newcomers?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Look, I think I asked the wide receivers coach Rashad Samples when there was a media day a couple months ago that same exact question. And look, he did answer the correct question that you want to hear the wide receivers coach say. We don't care who's lining up behind center. We as wide receivers, collectively as a group, have to do our job no matter what. But when you talk about splitting the reps, then yes, I think it does become very tricky for wide receivers who obviously can't throw the ball to themselves. Right. There's a fact where, Drew Pine, for example, gets, let's say 60% instead of 80% of the reps. And then, assuming that Bourget is not 100% healthy to take part in the team segment. So now I got Jacob Conner, let's say, taking the next 20%, and maybe Jenna Rashada taking 10% of the remaining. So obviously every quarterback brings a different flavor and, their own interpretation of the offensive scheme and how quickly or how slowly they grasp it. And sure, I mean, wide receivers can definitely be affected over there. And I agreed about it. That's a huge issue to look at.
Yeah, because each quarterback, might have different tendencies. Every quarterback throws a ball differently. Some throw with more touch. Bourget, especially last year, throws it with great anticipation, throwing guys open. Other guy, and improvisational abilities. When a play breaks down, how does that figure in? How does that report? Because you see some of those quarterback wide receiver tandems that have that in-game experience. When the play breaks down and the guys that get in the pocket, you see some of those guys being able to kind of step up in that regard. But Joe, I want to get your take, because two guys that are coming back last year, and Elijah Badger in the breakout, and then the Gary Chambers 2.0, the first down machine himself, Giovanni Sanders. What are you expecting from them now that both of them finally took major steps forward last season?
Well, a big part of that is obviously the quarterback combination. You look at the productivity that they had. Now, they largely did it all year long, but there were some major partnerships with Trent Bourget, when he got the call there. Elijah Badger, you figure is just going to continue to take steps up the ladder, 1,000-yard potential this season for sure. You want to just see those small increments, whether it's being just a team leader, a consistent contributor. We're not where we were a year ago or 2 years ago, where it was like his name really being said. I mean, I remember, we've talked about him in the last few springs, wondering, okay, is he going to show that potential? Is he going to, put on the field what was said about him as a high school recruit? Okay, he did that last year. This is the status has shifted from potential to actualization, and now stepping up the ladder from a very, very good player to, a potential first team all conference caliber player and an NFL draft pick after this year. So you want to see those sort of advancements be made. While Sanders, he just a great story in and of himself and what he did last year, and eager to see how he progresses. Is he going to be someone that can take another step up and remain as that complementary receiver to Badger? Or is he going to have a tough time fighting off this slew of transfers and incoming players, because there are a lot of guys that have quite a bit of potential, some that have some experience as well. So that's going to be a really intriguing thing to see how he is able to hold on to his spot, or if that's something that is a little bit up for grabs. Obviously the top dog in the pecking order, it would be a massive shock if someone is coming out here and outplaying Elijah Badger from this group. But it may not be a massive shock. It would be a surprise, but not quite as a earth-shattering shock if over time someone else emerges in a high role as well. So again, these guys can't play as if their positions are etched in stone.
Yeah, so obviously Badger, kind of that wide receiver one heading in. Sanders was able to do what he was able to do from the slot last year, but then there's a lot of newcomers, and there's obviously a spectrum of what these guys bring. Xavier Guillory coming over from Idaho State has got good size and speed, and I know the athleticism that he brings is something the coaching staff's really excited about. Jake Smith, a former blue chip recruit, I was he top 50, top 100 national type of player. Unfortunately, his career's kind of been derailed by injuries at his stops at Texas and USC. But how healthy is he? Because he is obviously immensely talented. Troy O'Meary has a big body at 6'3", 213 pounds, coming over from Texas. Melquan Stovall offers a different profile. He's a 5'9" guy there. You have a couple of freshmen, Caleb Black and Corbin Hendricks. Zeke Freeman and Javen Jacobs. They're some speedsters types. Some of the smaller guys. You have Andre and Chad Johnson. Are they going to be able to remain relevant in such a crowded room, or one of these newcomers? Whether it's a Guillory, perhaps a Smith. Smith's a guy that has had success from the slot. Is he able to challenge Gio Sanders? Guillory has that side speed combination that could be a great opposite field complement to an Elijah Badger. But again, you have all these receivers, one football, and also just that again, going back to the rapport with the quarterback, a lot of questions, but I think you got to feel pretty good, kind of unlike running back position where you don't necessarily have that lead dog. At least at wide receiver, you got yourselves an Elijah Badger, one of the Pac-12's best.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the starting 3 wide receivers are going to be Gilroy, along with Sanders and Badger. I agree with you, Brad. Gilroy is somebody who really ignites the imagination with the athleticism, with his size. I was privy to actually get some raw numbers of players and their top speed in one given workout in end of February. I did share that in our premium message board, the Huddle, and both Gilroy and Jake Smith were in the top 5 as being the fastest players of recording the highest top speed out of all the players on the team in this one given workout. Now, granted, it's just a snapshot. I mean, we don't know if it's really a trend that's been going on, but first of all, I would say that that's great news for someone like Jake Smith, who, like I said, Brad, I mean, has not played football in a long time.
What was his injury? I gotta plead ignorance on this one. Do we know what his injury? Like, is it a lower body thing to where him, running among the best? Is that an indication of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a lower body injury. I believe what happened is that he did tear his ACL in his first year at USC. And then, just decided to take that year off. His second year at USC wasn't really 100% healthy to begin with, but he was thinking in the long term, knowing that his future probably is not going to be there with the Trojans. So just kind of preparing himself to be in the transfer portal. But
it also looks like some complications going back to even further, like to the Texas game with a broken foot as well.
Yeah.
So when you have knee and foot, necessarily,
like I was going to say, like if he had a busted hand and couldn't catch the ball, okay, you could still probably run a fast 40 on that. If we're talking about, should we start getting excited about Jake Smith? Okay, if it's lower body foot stuff and he's running among the fastest players on the team or at his position group, that's a so far so good thing, at least in my book.
No, I agree, and I think that assuming Jake Smith is going to line up at the slot, I think he's definitely going to give Gio Sanders all he can handle, and I love Gio Sanders too. I thought he had a great game to what we thought was going to be his last game in an ASU uniform against U of A. I said to this day I feel like a little foolish. I was, doing my wrap up with my videographer Nick Borgia, and I was talking about, Gio Sanders, really had a great year. And if this is his last game at Arizona State, he really went up on top, even though ASU lost to U of A. I think he had, 10 receptions for 100 yards.
I think it was like 8 for 120 and his first career touchdown.
Yeah, exactly. We put up a great game. And Gio Sanders, much to the delight of ASU fans and coaches, I would have to imagine, said that he actually is going to come back for another year. So I think him and Jake Smith for that starting slot position can really be quite the battle. Like I said, I mean, there definitely are some intriguing names. I mean, Andre Johnson is a player that I always liked. I always felt that he had a lot of unfulfilled potential, and maybe different coaching staff, different scheme can really bring the best out of them. I mean, one player that I think you mentioned, Brad, is Antonio Mary from Texas. Obviously, Rashad Samples is very very familiar with him. So I'm kind of curious to see coming as a Power 5 transfer how much an impact he can make in the spring.
Yeah, especially with that big body. I mean, he's 6'3". I mean, that's a nice profile.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of big body, I mean, even though he's a true freshman, but Corbin Hendricks, that's one guy. I don't know, Brad. I think he could sneak into the 2 deep, and it's all said and done, at least in the last week of spring practice. So that's somebody I think that is just really really interesting.
That's another 6'3", 6'4" guy. I mean,
yeah, exactly. So I mean, there's definitely some good size. There's definitely some good athleticism on this wide receiver group. So this is a group that, even though it has a lot of new faces, I really think there is some quality in those newcomers. But going back to original porn, Brad, does the quarterback competition, does the splitting of the reps, which may be even in a exaggerated manner, for lack of a better term, how much does or does not affect the wide receivers? I mean, on the one hand, they're all starting with a clean slate, brand new coaching staff, brand new scheme. but you can definitely wonder if the splitting of reps with the quarterbacks and does adversely affect this wide receiver group. But just from a raw talent perspective, this is one group that is definitely not short on talent.
And then they're not going to be the only group that is going to be looked at to catch the ball, because, again, with the annual thing, this is going to be the year that tight ends are fully unleashed. Now, it seemed like the back half of last year, finally, after years of pleading, the tight end became a viable and a dangerous part of the Sun Devil offense, led mainly by the I can't say research, but the surgeons of Jalen Conyers, putting together, really kind of tapping into that 4-star potential he had as an initial Oklahoma signee. His size, his physicality, you saw the big time catches he was making throughout the back course of the year. He's back, and also ASU got some good news, and Messiah Swinson decided to come back as well. So you have your top 2 tight ends and an offense that, going back to looking at what the Ducks like to do in the Kenny Dillingham offense, that position group accounted for 10 receiving touchdowns last year, and you have Jalen Conyers, who is poised to become one of the, I wouldn't say just the conference's one of the best conferences tight end, but one of the best tight ends in the country. But then you have the 6'7", 6'8" Messiah Swinson, who I thought was criminally underutilized last year. Jacob Newell's working his way back from an ACL. That was one that the former coaching staff was very excited about. And of course, Jason Mons is the new position coach here. But obviously with Conyers and Swinson, you got to feel pretty good about the opportunity here that and with a new starting quarterback, or at least a quarterback trying to learn his way in this offense. They always say tight end's a quarterback's best friend.
Yeah, I mean, people really need to understand how hot Conyers ended the season. The note by which he ended the season was. I don't have the data in front of me. I got to apologize, but I remember tweeting something, and it might have been when he announced that he was coming back, that if you take the numbers from, I believe, his last 5 or 6 games, I mean, essentially from the point that Trenton Bourguet was inserted in the lineup, he had that monster game against Colorado. The numbers that he put up across that span are better than any 5 game stretch, whatever it was, that ASU has had in any numbers I could find. And we're talking better than any 5 game stretch that Zach Miller, Todd Heap, Chris Coyle, these guys had. The school records are kind of realistic. As far as like single season stuff for tight ends, the receptions, it's in the 50s. I believe it's under 60 catches. The yardage is the kind of thing that would translate for that sort of performance. So if he continues this upcoming year, anywhere near the note that he ended this last year, and there's really no reason to think that he won't. I mean, like you said, Brad, we could be talking about just an absolute breakout situation, one of the better seasons that ASU has had, and it would not shock me if he puts together statistically the best season an ASU tight end has ever had. That's within reach. That's within his potential. So that's a major, major thing. And when you package that and Elijah Badger, and if these others can step up as well, the total landscape of the pass catchers is something that gets pretty intriguing. And to your point, Swinson is someone that, perhaps they could find that role. It's, kind of a cliche thing, but, like the red zone type of deal where maybe he doesn't catch the ball a ton, but maybe he gives you 4, 5, 6 touchdown catches on, 12 or 15 receptions on the year, just something like that. If Newell's an athletic guy that can get back to form after his, because he had, a foot injury, if I'm not mistaken. So, this is when you combine the potential, the depth, and for the first time in a long time, some actual proof out there, there is as much reason to get realistically excited about this tight end group as there has been in a very, very, very long time. And I can't remember a time where you had this sort of a group, not just a person, not just, hey, Chris Coyle's coming back after catching 50-plus passes. That's cool. Or Zach Miller's coming back. This is a group that provides tremendous intrigue.
Yeah, so just real quick, Coyle in 2012, 57 catches for 696 yards. Last year, Conyers, 38 catches, 422. But basically the lion's share of that was, as you mentioned, Joe, in that last 5 games. He had 8 in the prior 7 games. So if you project his finish out, you got to figure perhaps even more wide open offense in Dillingham compared to what we saw last year. This should be pretty exciting from that group of tight ends. And of course, obviously you have a guy like Bryce Pierre as well. But just that 1-2 combination. If you have the physicality and the frames of Conyers and Swinson kind of controlling the seams, you got a Badger and a Guillory, perhaps on the outside. That all of a sudden becomes a pretty welcoming sight for whatever quarterback ultimately ends up winning that job.
And like I said, Brad, when you talked about the wide receivers, and that is an excellent point. How much is the split of the quarterback reps? How much does this ongoing quarterback competition affect not only the wide receivers but also the tight ends? And not to go off on a tangent over here, but when I did talk to somebody on the team last year, saying, how come, Emory Jones was not able really to throw the tight ends as well as Trent Bourget did. And the answer was actually pretty simple. They said, look, most of the time when you throw the tight end, you are throwing it into very, very tight spaces, and you're just really counting on him just to get a jump ball or just run like a tighter route compared to a wide receiver like Elijah Badger, for example, and to really make a play. And when you have a quarterback like Emory Jones that just doesn't have the confidence in him delivering to a tight end, whether it be Conyers, whether it be Swinson, and now you have a quarterback like Bourget who had all the confidence, especially in Conyers, then you really have a different dynamic altogether that allows for the tight end group to really, really flourish. Drew Pine, if I'm not mistaken, Notre Dame had a great tight end.
Meyer,
to throw to. So that's maybe a very, very positive element over here, that if Drew Pine is going to be the starter, then him getting a tight end involved in the offense is really second nature. Obviously, Bourget, if he's going to be the starter, then we don't have to worry about him delivering the ball to the tight end. But overall, this is a group that is really extremely talented. I think one of the most interesting comments about this group is when I had to sit down an interview with defensive coordinator Brian Ward. He told me that when they were scouting ASU, and really compared their tight end group to Utah, which we all think is really the salt of the Pac-12. Obviously Dilton Kincaid, I believe is
first round buzz.
Yeah, for first round buzz, is going to be in the draft. But they felt that the tight end group for Utah and tight end group for ASU was really on par, with each other. And Brian Ward said, and when that game actually played out in Pullman in middle of November, it really did materialize, that way. So, I think you just have a lot of factors in place over here that, as you and Joe mentioned, that really can take the involvement of this tight end group in the passing game to a much, much higher level. But as you also mentioned, does the quarterback competition, as much as it has the potential, emphasis on potential, of having an adverse effect on the wide receivers, is that also going to be true to the tight ends? But the talent over there with Jalen Conyers and Messiah Swinson is absolutely there. And I definitely agree with you and Joe that we could see some really crazy good numbers from this group.
Now, this is all not going to matter if the ASU offensive line just can't find some stability, and a lot of that is going to become falling on the shoulders of the newcomers, because they have a couple key returners. Isaiah Glass, finished last season as the starting left tackle. Emmett Boley saw time as a starter at tackle as well. Joey Ramos, unfortunately, had that season-ending injury, but he's back in the fold. But still, you have some questions there. But ASU, as you saw, went after the offensive linemen really hard in the portal, and they got some good ones. These guys that I'm really intrigued to see how things play out. And also, I think one of the cool things about the portal is you can get guys that have multiple years, so they could help you now, or they could be developmental pieces like a Bram Walden, for example. But it's going to become one of the underrated storylines of spring, of just how this offensive line shakes out. Hod, what's your initial impression of what ASU brought in and how that kind of goes along with some of the key guys that are coming back this year?
Yeah, but I definitely think to your point that ASU really did a great job replacing the players that did leave, and there's no realistic reason to think that this offensive line is going to take a step back from last year. To me, it's only a question is, are they really going to be just on par collectively, or can they really even be better than they were last year? You mentioned Isaiah Glass. to me, is a projected starter at left tackle. Ben Coleman from Cal, projected starter at left guard, somebody who played a lot at Berkeley.
Yeah.
So
30-plus starts, I believe.
yeah, so it's not only great to get a proven player, but get a proven player in the Pac-12. I just think that really helps the acclimation process that much more. Because they have a lot of new faces, the pronunciation may not be on par right here. But the transfer center from Las Vegas, Leaf Fatanau, I think is somebody who really should not be a drop-off at all from Ben Scott, even though he did obviously play at the Mountain West. But if my memory serves me correct, he was one of the more coveted offensive linemen, let alone centers, in this region from the transfer portal. So I think ASU really did well landing him. You mentioned Joey Ramos. I think is going to be the projected right guard. Definitely a player that has been there, done that in the Power 5 level. I think that maybe if he is healthy all of last year, maybe that the overall play of the offensive line could be elevated that much more. And Aaron Frost, right tackle,
Really excited about him.
Yeah, really excited name, and you're probably in the same line of thinking that I am, that this guy was actually supposed to be in last year's NFL draft. An injury prevented him from doing that. So not only does it not stay in Nevada, he actually now transfers to Arizona State. I think that could be quite the upgrade just in a vacuum from the right tackle position. And then you got a guy like Emmett Bole, who played left tackle, battling some with the side glass, ended up losing I think that battle. But somebody that came from a D2 school last year, so now with one year under his belt at a Power 5 level, I think somebody who can be a very, very formidable backup. Bram Walden from Oregon, obviously very familiar here for local fans. Played at Scottsdale Saguaro. Kind of like Jake Smith, maybe not having the breadth of injury history, but does have some injury history. But if he's fully healthy, I think that's one heck of addition from the transfer portal. You got some young guys like Austin Berry that I feel can be really solid backups. Junior college player in Kyle Scott. You can go on and on just listing all the players over here, but overall, I think with this scheme, with a pretty, I would say, underrated offensive line coach in Saka Tuitele, somebody who's maybe didn't coach all that much at the Power 5 level, but very familiar just in the Western region. I think this offensive line, really, with all the pieces that it added, with the depth that it has, there's no reason to see any drop off at all from last year, and I think really we could see it being an elevated performance. And as I mentioned, Brad, that's the key to everything that Arizona State's going to do on this side of the ball.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the potential is nearly certain that it'll be an upgrade from what the final starting offensive line was last year. You talk about like when Ladarius Henderson was out, other circumstances, things like that. So if you're looking in kind of a short spectrum of year over year, and you take the final product of last year and compare it to the early product of this year, I think you're looking at an upgrade with relative ease. And you talked about some of the names that Hod just recited. The potential for depth is there because you're not necessarily counting on a ton of true freshmen or even redshirt freshmen to be having valuable places in even in the two deep. You have junior college transfers, you have D1 transfers, many of which have little or even no FBS experience, but at least it's just something above like a true freshman, to where again you get a couple injuries and you got a guy that's in action that really shouldn't be. So again, not saying it's the strength of the entire team, but if you're looking for small victories or at least glimmers of hope, I think if this line comes together as it has the potential to, it could be something where it's at least trending upward.
Yeah, and one thing that really kind of excites me too is the versatility. Ramos is a guy who's had starts at both guard and tackle. Frost also, you think that he's probably going to project best to tackle, but he also has experience at guard, so you can kick him inside depending on perhaps some needs, injuries, what have you. Coleman, really excited about Coleman, and as you mentioned, Leif Fatanu is one of the guys that was really coveted in the portal and kind of solidified in the interior of that line. But Walden is a guy that I talked to Coach Tuatele. Is real excited about. He asked him is he going to be more of kind of a developmental guy? Still young, a class of 2021 guy. Granted, Rivals had him as the 111th overall player in the country. So this is a blue chipper in his own right. But Tuatele did not discount that Walden could be in the mix for a job. And I think one of the things that was talked about, with Dillingham being with Walden at Oregon last year, it's they didn't see him smile a whole lot, but I think the anecdote is now Walden, he's at home, he's back home in the Valley, smiling around, and the mental aspect can really help elevate a player's game. So we'll see some quality pieces though with experience, but also I think getting some guys from the portal with some years ahead as well. It kind of bodes pretty well. So we'll see. If perhaps that starting five that you kind of laid out, Hod, it seems very logical if they can lock that in, and then if they can, the sooner they can do that, and the more chemistry and time they have to gel, that would just really kind of strengthen the entire offense, top to bottom. Now switching over to the defensive side of the ball. Now the way that the coaching staff is kind of split up. Vince Amy will be taking over the defensive tackles with kind of Charlie Regal taking over with the edges. So just going to start on the interior. Maybe I'll work our way out. I think that defensive tackle spot is you mentioned perhaps on the offensive side that the running back they probably need to make a move. I think the threat level here on the defensive tackle is for me a big, perhaps the biggest question mark outside of quarterback. Because you have some quality players, but you don't necessarily have a whole lot. Because B.J. Green's perhaps is the most notable. He's been very effective in spot duty, but is he ready? Because he's still an undersized guy. Is he ready for more? You have Robbie Harrison, who was obviously a wealth of just kind of raw physicality. The pet project of Robert Rodriguez, now with the Arizona Cardinals, which is great to see Coach Rodriguez stay in the Valley. Julio Rivera Harvey, but ASU had an addition that maybe in flux a little bit. So a lot of question marks on the interior of this defensive line. So what's your initial read on where ASU is? Because we've seen just the importance, especially in the modern game, of having an effective defensive front. Brian Ward, his defenses love to be very active up front, but does ASU have enough right now as spring's about to open to kind of have the impact and run the kind of defense that Brian Ward necessarily may want to?
I totally agree, Brad, that if you look at the areas of concern going into spring practice, areas that if you're an ASU fan, hope are not going to continue to be a concern come April 15th, then yes, I would say that the interior of the defensive line does absolutely fall under that category. You really only have two proven players, both of them at the three technique. Anthony Cooper is actually going to move from defensive end to the three technique, just because A, he has the capability of doing it, but B, more importantly, he's just really needed much more over there than he is on the edge. So B.J. Green, to your point, can just still be in that backup situational role. I think that there really is the best way to utilize him. But really, I think when it comes to the interior positions, that's where the experience kind of starts and ends. I mean, like you said, you mentioned a lot of young players over here. I'm not going to repeat those names, but you also have some newcomers like Samuel Benjamin, Tristan Mundy, who were maybe coming in as a defensive end, but now we're going to be probably asked to be playing it inside, whether it be nose tackle, or three technique. I think that one name that is really, really intriguing, somebody who added a lot of good weight, is Blazin Lono Wong. I haven't said that name in a while.
Yeah.
It took a little while to remember it, but at any event, he pretty much, I think, added about 40, 50 pounds.
So they're going to kick him inside?
They're absolutely going to kick him inside, probably a nose tackle. Again, it was able to add a lot of good weight. I think one of the coaches told me, he went back home on vacation to Hawaii, just came back 50 pounds heavier. I don't think it quite happened that way, but nonetheless, he's somebody that the coaching staff is really, really excited about to play inside. But like I said, you take Anthony Cooper and B.J. Green out of the equation, and we look at all the interior linemen, whether it be through technique, whether it be nose tackle, you just got a bunch of question marks over there. This is one area that really has to solve a lot of questions in spring practice, and maybe this is an area that I think bleeds over into August, trying to clarify where exactly is the pecking order and what is the true level of talent in this specific position group.
Yeah, I'm probably I would make multiple acquisitions through the portal to shore up my defensive line because you touched on like you like what you see from Green, but that's in spot two. You're not necessarily sure that given his frame that he's necessarily best served as a guy getting a ton of work in there. But you're moving guys around that have perhaps more experience on the edge to see how they translate on the inside. Just leaves you on real uneasy footing.
Yeah. I think the interior of the line is something that they really need to address. We talked about, we're getting ahead of ourselves because we're just barely previewing spring football, but we're talking about the to-do list for the summertime or the late spring months. But it just seems very evident that getting some big bodies on the defensive line are going to be very crucial there. You got to be intrigued by some of the names and the accolades, the pedigree of some of the competitors for like the edge positions, whether it's Clayton Smith, a 5-star guy coming from Oklahoma, Elijah O'Neal, who really intrigues me from what he did at the JUCO level, and just seeing in general what Michael Matus will bring back to this program. So there are some interesting things along those lines. But yeah, when you're talking about putting this whole thing together and just the recency of trauma of just seeing ASU getting gashed on the ground so much last year and moving into this 4-2-5, though it's something that we've seen before in different looks, but you just would feel so much more comfortable with some additions on the defensive line. And it's pretty disheartening that one that they thought they had may not come to fruition now as things evolve. So again, it's going to be something to keep an eye on. It would be a wonderful surprise, kind of like I said for running back. Again, it would be a wonderful surprise if somebody jumps out at that position group and says, no, that dude right there can run for 1,000 yards this year, and we know it. Whereas if you see the defensive line and say, no, we've got this group right now, and people are standing up and showing up, and they can put it together and turn this thing around. It would be a pleasant surprise, but a surprise all the same. I'm certainly expecting that even after this next month or so of spring ball, that we're in a position like, okay, we saw some things, but still need to address some things.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Joe, like pushing out to the outside, though, on the edges and the defensive end spot. Obviously getting Michael Matus back after his season-ending injury is big, if for nothing else, just like the leadership aspect. I mean, one of the most respected guys in that locker room, but yeah, he's always been, not necessarily maybe the flashiest, most impactful guy in terms of a pass rush, but a steady run defender and sorely missed, as you mentioned, against the University of Arizona. But yeah, just, three big-time names that really, I think, really exciting with Clayton Smith, the former 5-star coming over from Oklahoma. Prince Dorba, I believe, is a 4-star recruit that's coming over from Texas. Elijah O'Neal was one of the most sought-after JUCO edges. Ashley Williams at the 4-star signing day, excitement there. Flipping him from I believe Auburn. Garen Stansbury entered the portal, decided to come back. Wealth of talent, all the tools. Can he actually kind of get find a way to become an impactful contributor as well? So Dylan Hall is a guy that is also coming over after being a JUCO transfer a year ago. So I feel much better about the perimeter of the Sun Devil defensive front than certainly the interior. Hod, how do you obviously this is a different scheme, and we've talked at length about just how ineffective and perhaps passive, vanilla, however you want to describe it, last year. The sack numbers, the making quarterbacks' life miserable was non-existent.
Yeah, and I, as you know, Brad, and I think you share this sentiment. We're big fans of Robert Rodriguez, the outgoing defensive line coach, and I think that the scheme that Donnie Henderson, last year's defensive coordinator, employed really made Robert Rodriguez and his group look much worse than they really are. When you get somebody like Brian Ward right now with a proven track record at Washington State and was able to do that, I think even with lesser talent than what he has right now in Tempe, I think that there's definitely genuine reason to be excited. From what I heard, and granted you can only go by the strength and conditioning workouts with Joe Connolly that have been taking place since January, but I heard that people are really excited about Elijah O'Neal and are really excited about Clayton Smith. So they're two guys that I would expect starting the first week of spring practice are really going to stand out, and for all the good reasons. But it really is just a weird, maybe frustrating dynamic that as many question marks as you have in the interior, when it comes to the edge, I think you have a much higher level of talent that you had here in a while.
I mean, I don't know how many times that, in the times that we've spoken to Kenny Dillingham that he's just talked about, on defense, it's all about impacting the quarterback and making the quarterback's life miserable and being disruptive. And that was something that was non-existent a year ago. One of the worst sack totals in a season by ASU. I think, I don't know, depending on the kind of online record keeping, it's a little shaky, but several years. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, if you're able to have this amount of talent along the edges, some of them are probably going to pan out. So that's pretty good. It's just a matter of whether you can compensate with something up front. But as we talked about, with the defensive tackle perhaps being a area that you might need to upgrade come early May. Linebackers one that I think is on that list for me as well. Obviously in this defense, in this base 4-2-5, you're only having two guys necessarily out there, but just from a numbers perspective, some concerns because you have Travion Brown, who obviously is a natural fit, knows this defense coming over from Wazoo with Ward and linebackers coach A.J. Cooper. But even there, he wasn't necessarily a full-time starter. He got some starts, but kind of more of a rotational player. Will Schaefer and Caleb McCullough are back after having a few years here in Tempe, but we still have not seen them as consistent, full game starters. Tate Romney and Crew Jackson, obviously, they're two local guys as well that have not necessarily been huge contributors so far in their college career. So linebacker is a key position, obviously, on this defense, but you just don't necessarily have perhaps, maybe a little bit of Trey Brown, but just a whole lot of depth that that you can count on.
Yeah, I mean, like pretty much echoing a lot of what was said on the defensive line or the interior of the line. It would be a surprise if a body of work is put together during the spring that says, hey, we are fully comfortable with this group right now. So I would expect that to be an area that they hit. And again, you could sell something to players. It seems like it makes sense that there could be at least one starting opportunity that will be available for someone to come fill by way of transferring in this spring meaning the time of year after spring football, possibly too. To your point, Brown has starting experience, and it makes sense that he will be a starter, and that's something that it feels like a safe prediction. But we're not talking about Adam Archuleta or Pat Tillman or somebody like that, or Brandon McGee, who's coming in and has a wealth of experience as an all-conference caliber performer. So even that is something that may be treading a little bit lightly as the proper course of action. So I think there will be just a lot of eyes on that front. I guess we can call it a front six in this defensive alignment to see, okay, who's stepping up, are players surprising. Just this transfer portal world in general is so unique because you're bringing in so many new faces that have a little bit of experience. You haven't really tracked their progress to know that, yeah, this guy's been redshirting and he's, sitting on the back burner this past year. You think about a guy like a Carl Bradford who redshirted and they played a little bit as a redshirt freshman, and then he had a monster sophomore year. You track those guys as they progress in your program. When they're doing that elsewhere and then they come to your program, don't really know what you have. Tate Romney, we've heard these superlatives of him, from his high school career that make him sound like he could be an absolute monster. Just doesn't have much experience at this level. So, once again, a lot of eyes are going to be on this position group.
Yeah, I think that the starters right now are pretty much etched in stone in Will Schaefer and Travion Brown being the starters. But, to your point, Brad, I mean, after those two proven players, it really is a question of what the pecking order is going to look like. And I think it's just a virtual guarantee that you are going to see in a one portal edition, maybe even two, in this position group. I mean, you only have to play two linebackers on most downs, but you still want to have a very formidable depth group behind your starters. And I don't know if right here, right now, we can sit down here and say that with confidence. Sure, spring practice sometimes has pleasant surprises, and maybe one of those pleasant surprises is going to be that this linebacker group is actually deeper than really thought it was going to be. And I think maybe one of the more intriguing players is somebody who's actually only going to be here in the summer. One of the best names in football, Kevion Thunderbird. Yeah. How appropriate is a guy with the last name of Thunderbird ends up here in the Valley at ASU? The linebackers group is just, I think, that just like running backs. I mean, sure, there's some talent over there. You're not really sure about the depth. You're not really sure about the overall caliber of talent, and you're thinking that it's just all but a given that the transfer portal is going to be very busy in those two positions, for example. But maybe spring practice can provide a pleasant surprise over here. For good or for bad, everybody not named Trevion Brown is really starting with a clean slate with a brand new scheme. So I don't know if that's something that is to the detriment of a linebacker group that's somewhat questionable on the talent, or maybe it's just somewhat of an equalizer when you're not sure what kind of quality players ultimately you do have at linebacker.
And moving to the back five in the secondary. Now, of course, we mentioned that it's going to be a different look in the scheme. But when you look at the cornerback position specifically and what new cornerbacks coach Brian Carrington has to work with, it's pretty good because you're returning both starters. Ro Torrance, I thought, unfortunately, he was dinged up a little bit and missed some games. But when he was out there, I think he really kind of was emerging as one of the Pac-12's better corners. Ed Woods had an opportunity opposite of him to really kind of establish himself as a starting caliber Pac-12 corner. I think one of the bigger question marks, because if you feel pretty good with the starters, is Isaiah Johnson. The guy who's tremendously talented. I believe he's with the highest rated recruit in the 2020 class. Mm-hmm. 4-star guy. When he was out there, looked great. The problem is you do things off the field that keep you off the field on game day. But he went in the portal. He came back. That to me, I think, is such a interesting wild card in this whole situation. Because he could be perhaps the best corner on this roster, but it doesn't matter if you're not able to consistently get out there and be in the good graces of your coaches to let you go out there and play.
If there's one player that has to turn the page from last year, and like you said, Brad, it's not so much his play on the field, because most times it actually was solid, but just turn the page from everything that happened off the field, and just there's just minor transgressions, which is nothing criminal, not even academic, but just stuff that just is going to keep holding you back. ASU fans are really, really hoping that Isaiah Johnson is just ready to be a brand new player, which, like you said, may have a hard time busting into that starting lineup that right now is Ro Torrance and Ed Woods. And let's not forget about Mason Williams. Yeah. I just feel like, as far as in terms of a two deep of cornerbacks in a very cornerback friendly league like the Pac-12, I think Arizona State is actually really sitting pretty. And ironically or not, this is one position that doesn't really need help from newcomers. Is not really getting that much help from newcomers at all. So maybe just all that returning experience can make it easier for a guy like Brian Carrington, who is actually having his first assistant coaching job here at Arizona State as a secondary coach. By the way, I don't know if you're going to touch on this later, but Brian Ward, the defensive coordinator, is actually going to work with the safeties. Yes. So Brian Carrington is really just more regulated, if you will, to working with the cornerbacks. But again, just having all that proven talent come back is just a big plus in a league that obviously loves to throw the ball. But this is one position where I think the coaching staff, by and large, is just sleeping very, very well at night, knowing who they have at cornerback.
And you're looking at the safeties there. A couple of familiar names kind of highlight there. Chris Edmonds, I thought, was by the end of the year was one of the better defenders on this team. Kind of had a nice nose for the ball, leading the team in picks. Jordan Clark, with that versatility, can play corner, nickel, also play safety. Xavier Alford is, for me, really, really exciting, coming over from USC. He's a guy that I think can be, in this kind of three safety system can be a real difference maker. You add in Shamari Simmons from Austin Peay as well. Willie Hart's, Elijah Gamage, guys who've been in the program as well. But Joe, I know last year you and I were both very high on Corey Bethley. Had some good moments, had some dumb penalties throughout the course of the year. But obviously, you know what you have in Edmonds and Clark, but now this is a system perhaps being more aggressive. What was the thing that Dillingham said in his introductory presser? Like, if you want to be a top 10 Sports Center defender, get those picks, come play in our defense. Those are guys with noses for the ball. Then he had a guy with guys like Alford who haven't necessarily had a chance to kind of fully flourish. But how do you feel right now about the safety group?
Man, I'm really intrigued by Alford because he's a guy who's done it at a high level. Bethley was a productive guy here. He produced. It wasn't certainly a perfect thing, and it was just a rough season. But he produced. Alford, he did so at USC year before last. I know he won some kind of uniquely titled player of the year thing, like a perimeter defender or something like that. It wasn't like safety of the year, but in any event, he got something done there, which is, if you do things at a high caliber level at USC, even though technically at that time I think it was probably that really off season that they had before Lincoln Riley came in, that's still getting something done. So I am highly intrigued by him. Edmonds, he really performed well, especially, again, kind of making that comparison to a guy like Scatabo coming from FCS to FBS to a Power 5 team. Edmonds made a pretty smooth transition if you're looking at the whole body of work now in year 2 after that first year and it being just a chaotic year to be in this program. I mean, this is a guy that really could take a step up and be a high-level all-conference caliber player. Jordan Clark, someone I think the world of and respect on a very high level as a human being. Got a tremendous amount of action. Made in a down year, he made the play of the year for ASU with that pick 6 against Washington. Again, someone that even though he's highly experienced, you think that he could come into his own as well. So it's a unique situation where you have some familiar faces coming back, but you can kind of task each of them with the potential to improve, but also the ability to do so. So I think this is a group that could be pretty solid, again, because Alford is if I'm ripping just off the top of my head, there are 2 players, and this might be something we'll talk about, so I won't go into depth about it. There are 2 transfers on offense, 2 transfers on defense that really catch my attention of like, these guys could be very interesting, and he's one of the 2 on defense.
So obviously, there's a lot of opportunity there, a lot of talent. Hod, who do you see as kind of like, I think Edmonds as an incumbent starter, like is kind of one of those 3. But who do you see as kind of opening with you have Torrance and Ed Woods as your corners. You have Edmonds at one safety spot. Who do you think the other guys are? And there's obviously a bigger group of true freshmen coming in, of true freshman DBs. Do you think any of those guys could perhaps contribute or get in this mix, at least in these 5 weeks of spring?
Well, let's put it this way. I mean, when you're playing a 4-2-5, and obviously you're going to have 3 safeties on the field as far as your base defense, then sure, that is definitely more playing opportunity. The bigger key, Brad, is that the nickelback in this defense, which really is probably akin more to the Tillman safety that ASU had under then defensive coordinator Danny Gonzalez, somebody that has to be just as adept at stopping the run as he is in coverage. We know that Jordan Clark played a quote-unquote more classic nickelback last year. Can he make that transition and be that nickelback that's going to be asked much more to support the run defense than he ever has been asked?
He's not a big dude.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so that's why I think when you look at the safety position, players like Xavier Alford and Shamar Simmons are 2 just great additions to the safety spot, and I think that one of them just might be the starter along with Chris Edmonds and Jordan Clark, or maybe Jordan Clark might lose his starting position to Simmons and to Alford. Just because of needing more size over there, again, really supporting the run defense. One guy over here is really the X factor, and I'm going to go back to the Danny Gonzalez 4-2-5, and maybe you already know the name I'm going to mention is the Willie Hartz. In 2019, I believe Willie Hartz was easily one of the better defenders on that ASU team. Really flourished.
Won the Sun Bowl.
Yeah, it really flourished. Yeah, someone wasn't a great memory for ASU, but but he really flourished in that 5 defensive back scheme. And I'm just wondering if this is going to be a pleasant deja vu for a guy like Hartz. I'm not going to say had issues off the field, but definitely had, I think, some elements that did hold him back from really being productive in the last few years. You kind of wonder, like, if this can be a renaissance for somebody like Willie Hartz. I'm not penciling him as a starter, especially not before even seeing him in spring practice. But he's somebody that I'd be very surprised if he doesn't really establish himself in the 2 deep when spring practice concludes on April 15th. So I really do like the pieces that they added over here. I like the fact that a guy like Hartz can just have like a whole revival of his career because he's shown that he can play well in a 5 defensive back scheme. So when it comes to the freshmen, Montana Warren, Josiah Cox, Sean Ross is only going to arrive here in the summer. I'm kind of skeptical of how much of an impact they can really make as a 2 deep. I know they like Josiah Cox quite a bit. But I know that he had a labrum surgery in the off season. I'm not sure if he's going to be 100% ready to go in spring practice. I think it'd be maybe somewhat limited. I don't think it'd be sidelined. But I'm just really curious to see if he's somebody that can really fulfill his potential. I know that when you talk about good high school football in Southern California, it looks like San Diego is kind of one of those flyover cities where nobody really gives that city or that area of Southern California much respect. But in terms of the best defensive player in that area of the country, he definitely was, if not one of the best, if not the best, definitely one of the best. So I think that Josiah Cox is somebody that can really make his presence known. Sean Ross is a 4-star defensive back from Florida. Again, only arrives here in the summer. How much does that set him back not being here in the spring? Time will tell. But I know that's another player that the coaches are really excited about. So much like cornerback, Brad, I don't think they really need much help from the freshmen over here, but they definitely need help from the transfers like Alford and like Simmons, 2 players which I totally agree with Joe are definitely some of the more intriguing newcomers, especially on this side of the ball.
So now heading to the specialists, where we have a complete turnover from last season, and this is you look at who they brought in, and it's definitely a who you know, a lot of familiarity with the new coaches, most principally Charlie Regal, the special teams coordinator as well, to no surprise. ASU, of course, had transfers out of their starting kicker, punter, and both. I think the top 2 long snappers lost 2, but they replaced the long snapper with Slater Zellers from Cal, a guy who has 30 plus games of experience as well. But my concern is, though, I don't know that they necessarily. I mean, when you lose a first team all conference player, hard necessarily to kind of replace him at that level. But I just think that there's going to be some drop off at the specialist spots. Carter Brown departed. He's now at Cincinnati. Dario Longhetto from Cal is now ASU's kicker. Eddie Chaplitsky took the opportunity to go play in the Big Ten for USC. Josh Carlson is coming over from New Mexico State. You look at his numbers and compared to Chaplitsky's. Well, I mean, we'll see. I mean, some good air to kick here in the desert. So, what do you think about how, especially a team that's going to be perhaps scratch and claw and playing some close games? Special teams can be such a difference maker. ASU's been kind of spoiled perhaps at punter and I guess kicker as well. How are you guys feeling about the moves that ASU had to make?
I think at kicker kind of feels like we're maybe in that like Zendejas territory to where you kind of need to, you feel comfortable, within some limitations, and that's probably going to be inside 40 yards, very likely. Hopefully my guy Steve Roush is doing the work with these folks. Yeah. Dobson Mustangs, Sun Devil, great dude, great family. The piece of Hod did with him was awesome not too long ago. Cannot say enough good things about that entire family. Very, very meaningful to me and my entire family. So hopefully he's able to instill some incredible advice and tactics upon that, because he's working with all those guys.
Yeah,
all those
every
guys.
day there's like tweets. They're out there on the field, just kicking everything.
Yeah, so Longhetto is going to be. It's kind of a rental, so to speak. I don't mean that with disrespect. He's just a short-term guy. And that was a decent get given within the context the fact that he needed to act quickly. Carlson has had some times within his college career. He's a little bit of a fairly well-traveled guy. He's had times with some numbers that stand out. He's had some times with some numbers that are a little bit more just kind of on the pedestrian side of things. So he's got experience. We'll see what we get in that regard. Now, obviously, just on the surface, without seeing anything in action for ASU, you don't feel that either is an upgrade over the predecessors, because you're talking about a first-team all-caliber punter and a place kicker that came in with some high accolades, played well as a freshman, and has a very high ceiling. So it's tough when you're looking at the comparison of things. If we're talking about the long snapper, which it's in this conversation, I feel like ASU very likely upgraded. I mean, Slater Zell is a real good snapper. If you look at his bio, I mean, these are it's a position where you have to do research because you don't know much about these guys. He has very high ratings from different services that scout that sort of thing, or is even pro potential. I mean, this is a guy that could be snapping on Sundays. So I think that was a huge get for them in that regard. Again, may or may not be the outcome of winning and losing games, but it's a position that's on the field, so it's important to have. So, once again, you've got experience, and that counts for something. I think that you're going to have, unless there's just performances that stand out that are different than expected, I think you're just going to have guys that have to play within themselves and have certain limitations, especially when it comes to place kicking. You don't have that, Zane Gonzalez automatic from 50-plus yards, or even, 40 or mid-40s or beyond. So it might be something where there's just a particular, it's a peg to fit in a particular slot that, obviously can be disadvantageous at times.
Yeah, if I remember serves correctly, Darren Longhetto really had some of his better years at Cal when Charlie Regal was there as a special teams coach. And the only year that maybe his numbers really took a dip was last year, when Regal was obviously the head coach at Idaho State. I mean, I know for a fact that the Regal is really, really excited to get Darren Longhetto back in the fold. To Joe's point, I mean, I had a great conversation with Steve Roush, and he really raved about all three players, Longhetto, Carlson, and Zellers. He really talked about, two of them just being older, more mature players. And I think, for special teams players, not that it's not important for any other position on the field, but, to have a kicker that you can try to ice them as much as you want, and it's just not going to really do much to them. When you have a punter that's used to really punting in pressure situations, I really think that Arizona State, in that sense, adding veterans rather than just now trying to rely on a true freshman or rely on a transfer that doesn't have much experience. I think they're just really, really lucky in that sense. But look, I mean, when it comes to Eddie Trapisky, the punter, you're right, Brad. I mean, it's hard to replace a first-team All-Pac-12 selection at any position, whether it be punter, quarterback, safety, whatever the case may be. I do have some optimism about this special teams unit. And honestly, to me, I mean, kicking and punting is something that you can watch taking place in practice, and to me, it's still not that much of an indication as to actually seeing on Saturdays. Maybe when you watch off his defense and team segments, you can get somewhat of a sense like, okay, this player or this position group are going to be okay or not be all that okay come Saturdays. But to me, special teams, it's really something that, I don't know, you just got to wait until September rolls by, because what you see in March, April, or what you see in August, sometimes is not really the true indication of what you're actually going to see on Saturdays. But I feel as special teams, they've done okay with the additions. I mean, I don't know if we'll see much of a drop off, but again, if I'm just going by what Charlie Regal is talking about those specialists, with Steve Roush, who works out a lot with them and works out now more than Charlie Regal does, just because spring practice hasn't started yet, and just to see the feedback that he has provided on those specialists, I think Arizona State is going to be okay. Are there going to be players that can really, flip the field on a consistent basis, or can really provide that winning field goal if needed. Time will tell. I'm just kind of like neither optimistic or pessimistic when it comes to that position.
All right, so as we kind of put a bow on our spring preview, a couple of things that we'll kind of, put a high level and look at what we're going to be tracking over the next 5 weeks. And, starting off, obviously other than the quarterback competition, that's going to be front and center and deservedly so. That group, we're each going to name a player, one on each side of the ball that, we're kind of very interested in kind of tracking. I'll start things off. On offense for me, it's Cam Scatteraboo. I just really liked what I saw. I was actually, even before he was a transfer, I was watching some of his games, and he had a big playoff game as well. And yeah, I think you mentioned earlier, a lot of Demario Richard in watching him. ASU needs a good run game, and I think he's got an opportunity being a very versatile back, a guy who can be an impact receiver as well. Because I think the pass catchers and the quarterbacks, it's going to be kind of wait and see. So I'd like to see if ASU can find a horse or a guy who can be a really productive member of a committee on the offensive side. Defensively, I'm looking at Trey Brown because we talked about the linebackers and what ASU needs there. He's the guy who has the most proven at this level, and even then, it's still kind of unknown because he's never been like a full-time starter. But he knows this system. Yeah, he's a guy that is getting some good acclaim as a leader as well. I think he's a good fit. We'll see, but I think it's a good foundational piece. I feel good about the secondary overall, but just up front, I have some questions. But I think, if you're having a guy like Trey Brown who can finally perhaps get a chance to come in and be an unquestioned starter with his knowledge of the defensive scheme, playing for coaches that he knows, I think that could be if he's able to come out there and put it together in spring, be in good shape.
Yeah, well, my selection, I think, at an offensive wide receiver, Xavier Gilroy. If Elijah Badger and Gio Sanders can really build on what to them really was a solid 2022, or maybe even Jake Smith is the one that's inserted in the starting lineup over Sanders. To have Gilroy as that third wide receiver that can really benefit from maybe more attention on Elijah Badger, or just really command his own attention with his play that can open up things for Badger. I think that's something that is really going to be huge. Again, we talk about the combination of size and speed. He might be the best of the best of the wide receiver group in that category. So that's one player that I'm really, really excited to see in spring practice. Another player out of who knows how many at this point has to make the transition from the FCS level to the Power 5 level. But if Chris Simmons, for example, at safety is some indication that if you're a stud in the FCS level, you should be at the very worst a formidable player at the Pac-12 level. Then if that theory does apply to Xavier Gilroy, then I think that's something that can help Arizona State quite a bit in their offense. On defense, Elijah O'Neal. I think this is one heck of a pass rusher that Arizona State was able to get. Again, much like the FCS players, when you come from a junior college level, how quickly can really acclimate to a much higher level. But he might be under the radar, maybe not so much on the radar, one of the most important players on defense, because when you talk about really trying to improve the pass rush, Michael Matus, can do an adequate job. Pass rushing is probably even stronger, really, in the run stopping. So just to have a terror from the edge role, that's going to be imperative for this defensive line, which, like I said, Brad, is really trying to up its pass rush numbers, whether it results in sacks or just results in incompletions by opposing quarterbacks. And for me, it's hard to see this defensive line really elevating its play, just in a very dramatic fashion when it comes to the pass rush category, without a guy like Elijah O'Neal having a good, if not great, season for the Sun Devils.
So for me, and it just kind of works itself out that we all pick different people. I'm going to go with two guys share the same last name. They were both top 50 overall recruits coming out of high school. Offense, it's going to be Jake Smith. You think back, it was the class of 2019, but, he was the national Gatorade Player of the Year, not just the state of Arizona, but national. The number 48 overall recruit by Rivals, the number 4 overall athlete, according to Rivals as well. He's traveled, he's seasoned, he's been injured, he's produced at Texas. I don't want to make too much out of something, but the early returns, these speed recordings, that's encouraging. It can't not be encouraging. I'm not saying it's a guarantee of anything, but it's encouraging. So he is such a wild card and has been since he announced that he was coming to ASU, because it could be like a bring up an old name from the past, like a Lauren Howard 2.0 of someone who came in that could set the world on fire, but injuries kept him off the field the entire time. Or he could get back in the game. And if he gets back in the game, is it going to be at a decent level? Is he going to achieve the potential he had, again, as a massively prestigious recruit? There are a lot of possibilities, and I think that we're gonna see a glimpse of what he's capable of doing here. Or we're going to be concerned if he's someone that's sidelined, if there are injuries. Again, whatever happens with him or doesn't happen with him is going to be telling in some capacity. Moving on to defense, Clayton Smith. He was a 5-star recruit. Those guys don't come through ASU either by initial acquisition, transfer, whatever it may be. 5-star recruits don't come through Arizona State all that often. He was the number 24 overall recruit, the number 2 outside linebacker in the class of 2020, so 21 rather, just a couple years ago. So this is somebody that Hod mentioned the early returns from workouts and things like that from the strength and conditioning program. That is encouraging. So there are little tidbits of encouragement we've seen about these two specific players so far in a very small sample, but ones that at the time that they finished their high school playing careers, the potential was absolutely through the roof. So, you could, if you come anywhere near what either or both players are have the potential to do, that could be very, very intriguing. And in the defensive Smith's specific case, if this is a guy that can get to the quarterback, I mean, that's as good as gold based on what we've seen last year with the tremendous lack thereof.
All right, and so then we'll close things out by highlighting one thing, or perhaps two things, that you'd each like to see kind of the team accomplish, or a question that that they can answer by spring's end. Now, as we touched on, things like the quarterback competition are going to be a little bit longer tail and go into fall camp as well. But my two things, I really want to see them figure out an offensive line, because they got all the pieces here. I want to see them kind of solidify that, get that lineup going, get that chemistry building, and just kind of that's just the more time you have to have things gel on that respect, I think you're in good shape. And then just to take get a good idea of where things stand at defensive tackle and linebacker, because you're going to have to go shopping. You just want to know how much and where you are, and get a good, honest evaluation of how those two very important position groups are going to stand.
Yeah, if you take out the quarterback battle out of the equation, I would say running backs. Like I truly believe that on this side of the ball, if there's one area where the coaches are not sleeping all that great at night, thinking about it is a running back position, and you just need this group really to hit the ground running, really to give that much level of confidence that maybe still doesn't preclude you from trying to get somebody in the portal, but maybe also adding a running back from the portal seem less of an urgency now than it would be potentially at the end of spring practice. So that's on that side of the ball. I think running back group just really needs to put a lot of concerns, a lot of question marks to rest. Maybe unfair position to fill huge shoes that ex-Valade left behind. But nonetheless, that's one area that definitely needs to show big in spring practice. On defense, yeah, Brad, I'm not going to be too creative over here. I totally agree with you that when it comes to the defensive back group, I think the coaches rightfully should feel really good about, but absolutely linebacker, interior defensive lineman, whether it's really more nose tackle, I would say, than three technique tackle. I think those are areas that are definitely areas of concern right now, and those are areas that I think that ASU absolutely is going to have to go in the portal come May 1st. The question is, I mean, are they just going into the portal really not feeling great at all about the group, or maybe just feeling kind of okay and just want to really just feel better about the group? But those are definitely position groups which I think are really going to be under the microscope, aside from the obvious quarterback battle for the entire spring practice. And it will be interesting how the coaches do truly feel about those position groups, which right now I think are definitely more of a concern than a comfort.
So for me, there are two position groups that you basically take the same questions to. One has already come up, one is not, in what you guys have mentioned. And it's the questions are we okay with who we have here? Can we succeed with who we have here? Or do we need to make changes and additions? And that's at running back on offense and linebacker on defense. I mean, essentially, you have depleted units on both sides. You lose what I think everyone would say would be your offensive player of the year and defensive player of the year from last season in Ex-Valade and Kyle Soley. Merlin Robertson as well, Daniel Ngata as well. So your links of the chain are all gone from this program. So a lot's gonna be determined with the depth of those positions. What does Tevin White bring you? What does Cam Scadaboo give you? What does DeCarlos Brooks give you, and others that are returning? What do you get out of Brown? What do you get out of Schaefer, Romney, etc.? Right now, there are a lot of possibilities, but there are a lot of questions, many more questions, and you feel like those are groups where it would not surprise you at all for there to be, marquee caliber signings from the transfer class. You're looking at interior defensive line, linebacker, and running back as ones that I think that they would be well served, unless there's some very shocking surprises, to go after starting caliber players or to have starting opportunities available to pitch to transfers. So as it pertains to this spring specifically, really keying in on running back and linebacker.
Obviously, a ton to track and follow over the next 5 weeks, and we'll be in your feeds each and every week, breaking down the latest developments, what we saw, and everything that is to come. There's always some fun surprises and some guys that perhaps we're a little bit under the radar. Maybe we didn't talk about them too much. Maybe we didn't talk about them at all. That may make some noise. But that's going to do it for this episode of Speak of the Devils. And of course, I'd like to thank our illustrious guest, Hod Rabino, on his fantastic appearance, number 88, officially now in the books. For the 2 or 3 listeners out there that are not already following you, Hod, how can they get caught up and get in tune to all the things you're doing?
Sure. Our website is devilsdigest.com. We're the Arizona State affiliate of the Rivals.com network. On Twitter, it's at Devils Digest. And you can best believe there's going to be a lot of spring practice preview pieces coming your way the rest of this week and also next week. Obviously, still covering ASU basketball. We're going to have boots on the ground there at the Pac-12 tournament in Las Vegas. Obviously, still covering Arizona State baseball as well. So this is definitely a busy time of year, even though it's just the off season for football. There's still a lot going on. So make sure you're all caught up on at devilsdigest.com.
So Hod, save me the effort of the sponsor pitch. Tell you obviously gave a rundown of just kind of what's to be found there. Let's hone in specifically on spring ball. What sort of content can folks who subscribe now or are interested in doing so expect over the next month, 6 weeks or so of time?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to have detailed practice reports on all the 15 sessions that Arizona State is going to run, in interviews with players, interviews with coaches, and at the end, just having comprehensive spring practice recaps. What have we learned? We raised a lot of questions over here in this podcast. Are those questions going to persist come April 15th, or maybe maybe other questions are actually going to pop up in the meantime? So definitely for all the in spring practice coverage, which is going to be extensive like it has been every year. Just make sure you tune in to devilsdigest.com. We're not going to be any shortage of features coming your way.
You can follow the show on social media, on Twitter at SOTD Podcast, Instagram at Speak of the Devils, Facebook, just search for Speak of the Devils, and give me a follow on Twitter and Instagram at bdenny29.
And you can follow me on all the things. Joe Healy 42. And once again, huge thank you to every single one of the sponsors. Of course, you heard from Hod here with DevilsDigest.com, and a huge shout out, as always, to DeFalco's Deli, Cactus Sports, Jones Auto Group, Spaghetti Shack, and Sun Devil Family Charities. We certainly encourage you all to support them in any possible way that you can if you aren't already.
And once you're done supporting our amazing sponsors, make sure to drop us a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. Joe and I will be back. We have a couple of fun things in the works, and as well, we'll be back each and every week recapping all the developments from ASU spring practice.